The microphone squeaked when my father tapped it. I remember that sound more than anything else from that night, that sharp, feedback shriek, cutting through the noise of 200 people in the banquet hall. Everyone went quiet. My father smiled the way he always did when he had an audience. That big, easy smile that made strangers think he was the warmest man in the room. "I just want to say a few words," he said, "about my son on his wedding day." My brother Daniel was standing near the head table with his new wife, already flushed from champagne and attention. He looked over at our father with that familiar expression, grateful, glowing, chosen. I was sitting at table 11. Not table 1 with the immediate family. Table 11, beside my father's colleague from work, and a cousin I hadn't seen since I was 9 years old. I had noticed the seating arrangement when I walked in, but I told myself it didn't mean anything. I told myself a lot of things back then. My father told a story about Daniel's first hockey game, then a story about Daniel's acceptance to University of Toronto. Then he said something about how proud he was, how Daniel had always been the one who carried the family name the right way. People nodded. People smiled. Then my father paused, the way someone does when they're about to land a joke, and he looked out across the room and said, "Some kids you raise, and you think, yeah, that one's going to be fine. And some kids..." He shook his head, still smiling. "Well, let's just say Daniel made up for the other one." The room laughed. Not everyone, but enough. A ripple of laughter moving through 200 people who thought it was a self-deprecating joke, a father being charmingly humble about parenting. My aunt near the front put her hand over her mouth and chuckled. My mother looked at the tablecloth. Daniel shifted his weight from one foot to the other and didn't look in my direction. I sat at table 11 and did not move. My name is Claire. I was 26 years old that night. I had driven 4 hours from Ottawa to attend my brother's wedding in Mississauga. I had bought a dress I couldn't really afford, found someone to cover my Saturday shift at the hospital where I worked as a respiratory therapist, and wrapped a gift that cost me $300. I had done all of that because I thought, for some reason I cannot fully explain, that this time would be different, that a wedding was too significant for the old patterns to show up, that my parents had maybe, quietly, over the years, begun to see me the way I had spent my whole life hoping they would. I don't know why I kept hoping that. I genuinely don't. Growing up in our house in Brampton, Daniel was the event, and I was the backdrop. He was 2 years older than me, and from the time I can remember, the household organized itself around him. His hockey schedule determined when we ate dinner. His report card went on the fridge. His mood set the temperature of a room. When he was happy, our parents were relaxed. When he was stressed about exams or struggling with a coach, the whole house held its breath. My job, as far as I could tell, was to stay out of the way and not add to the load. I was not a difficult child. I want to be clear about that. I didn't act out. I didn't get in trouble at school. I got decent grades, kept my room tidy, and learned very early to manage my own problems quietly. In some families that would earn you a reputation as the easy one, the low-maintenance kid. In my family, it just meant I was invisible. You don't notice the absence of noise, you only notice when someone makes one. Daniel made noise. Daniel demanded to be noticed and was rewarded for it every time. I watched that dynamic for 18 years and absorbed the message it carried. Your needs are negotiable, his are not. When I got into the respiratory therapy program at Algonquin College in Ottawa, my mother said, "That's great, honey," while she was loading the dishwasher and did not look up. When Daniel got into the engineering program at U of T the following year, my father took the whole family to the keg to celebrate. I sat across from my brother at that dinner and smiled and said, "Congratulations," and drove home afterward and sat in my car in the parking lot for about 20 minutes, doing nothing. I moved to Ottawa at 18, and I built a life there, piece by piece. I finished my program. I passed my registration exams. I got hired at a hospital I was proud to work at. I found a small apartment near the Rideau River that I slowly made into something that felt like mine. I called home every Sunday for the first 2 years, then every other Sunday, then whenever I could manage it, and eventually I had to be honest with myself that those calls left me feeling worse than before I made them. My mother would ask about Daniel. My father would mention something Daniel had achieved. When I shared something about my own life, there would be a polite pause, and then the subject would shift. I was not estranged from my family. I want to make that distinction. I showed up for Christmas. I came home for my grandmother's 80th birthday. I attended functions because I had not yet found the line between obligation and self-preservation. I was still trying to figure out if the way my family treated me was as bad as it felt, or if I was being, as my father used to say with a dismissive wave of his hand, too sensitive. That word. I heard it my whole life. Too sensitive. Said the way you'd say too loud, or too much like my feelings were a volume problem that could be adjusted if I just tried harder. When Daniel got engaged to his girlfriend, I'll call her Rachel, the family entered a 6-month orbit around the wedding. My mother flew to Toronto 3 times to help with venue decisions. My father contributed substantially to the cost, without anyone asking him, because of course he did. I received a text from my mother in late January that said, "Danny's wedding is June 14th, hope you can make it." Not a phone call, a text. Hope you can make it, like I was a coworker, being included out of courtesy. I could make it. I rearranged my schedule, I bought the dress, I made the drive. I found my name on table 11. I sat through the dinner, and I watched my father give that toast, and I heard the room laugh, and I made a decision very quietly inside myself. The way you make a decision that has actually been building for years, and just finally reaches the surface. I finished my meal. I found Rachel at the end of the night and hugged her, and told her she looked beautiful, because she did, and because none of this was her fault. I found Daniel and shook his hand and said I wished him well, and I meant that too. Then I walked to the parking garage, got in my car, and drove 4 hours back to Ottawa. I did not cry until I got past Oshawa. Then I cried for a long time, and somewhere around Kingston I stopped, and by the time I crossed into Ottawa, I had made myself a promise. I was done. Not dramatically. Not with a letter or a confrontation or a phone call where I said things designed to wound. I simply decided that I was going to stop arranging my life to be rejected in it. I changed my phone number and gave the new one to my friends and to my grandmother, who I loved and who had always been quietly kind to me, and to no one else in my family. I did not post on social media. I did not send a notice. I just quietly stepped out of a situation that had been hurting me for 26 years, and I gave myself permission to heal. People who haven't done this sometimes think it's a dramatic gesture. They imagine it must feel like slamming a door. It doesn't. It feels like finally sitting down after standing for a very long time. There's grief in it, real grief, because you are mourning something, not the family you had, but the one you kept hoping might exist somewhere underneath the one you knew. That hope is stubborn. It takes a long time to put down. I went to therapy. That is not a dramatic part of the story, but it might be the most important part. I started seeing a therapist in the Glebe neighborhood of Ottawa, and over the following months, I started to understand some things I had been too close to see clearly. I understood that I had been the scapegoat in a family system that needed one, that my parents, for reasons rooted in their own histories, had divided their children into roles. Daniel was the investment, the proof of their success, the one whose achievements reflected well on them. I was the comparison point, the one whose lower status made his higher status feel more significant. It wasn't personal, my therapist said. That almost made it worse. I understood that the too sensitive label had been a management tool. When I responded to unfair treatment with hurt feelings, I was the problem. My feelings were the inconvenience, not the treatment that caused them. Naming that clearly, out loud, in a room where someone was actually listening, was one of the more quietly shattering experiences of my adult life. I threw myself into my work. I was good at my job. I had always been good at my job, and without the emotional static of my family relationships taking up space in my head, I found I had more capacity than I'd realized. I took on more responsibilities. I mentored newer staff. I started a graduate certificate in healthcare leadership through Athabasca University, fitting the coursework into evenings and weekends. I built a small group of friends in Ottawa who knew me as I actually was, not as the lesser sibling, not as the too sensitive one, just as Claire. I started running. I ran along the river in the mornings before my shifts, and in the winter I ran anyway, which in Ottawa takes a specific kind of stubbornness that I discovered I possessed. I was not running from anything. I was running because I had energy now, actual energy, that I hadn't had before, and I needed somewhere to put it. 5 years passed. They were good years. Not perfect. I had hard seasons, a difficult relationship that didn't work out, a period when I was exhausted and struggling, and had to remind myself every day that I was allowed to ask for help. But they were years that belonged to me. I made my choices. I lived with my choices. I became someone I recognized and mostly liked, and that is not a small thing when you grew up being told in 100 quiet ways that you were the lesser version of someone else. I thought about my family sometimes, not with the old burning hope, but with something sadder and calmer, the way you think about a place you used to live, that you know you won't go back to. I wondered occasionally how everyone was. I heard things through my grandmother, who called me on my birthday every year without fail, and who never once pushed me to reconcile or explained herself to anyone on my behalf. She just called, and we talked, and she asked about my life with genuine interest, and I loved her for it. Through my grandmother, I knew that Daniel and Rachel had bought a house in Burlington, that my father had retired, that my mother was involved in some kind of community garden project. Surface-level information. I took it in and filed it away, and felt, mostly, okay. Then one Thursday evening in March, my grandmother called outside of her usual schedule. She didn't do that. In 5 years, she had never called outside of my birthday, or Christmas. I picked up immediately, and heard something in her voice that I had not heard before, a thinness, a careful quality, like someone walking slowly across ice. "I wanted to tell you myself," she said, "before you heard some other way." My mother had been diagnosed with early-stage Parkinson's disease. I sat down on my kitchen floor. I don't know why the floor. I was just suddenly on it. My grandmother talked for a while. She said the diagnosis was recent. She said my mother was managing, that the progression was slow at this stage, that she had good doctors. She said she wasn't telling me because I needed to do anything. She said she just thought I should know. After we hung up, I sat on the kitchen floor for a long time. I want to tell you that what I felt was simple. It was not. I felt grief, which surprised me. I felt something that was not quite guilt, but lived in the same neighborhood. I felt anger, still, underneath everything else, an anger I had thought I'd processed, and that turned out to have more rooms in it than I'd found. And I felt something else too. Something that took me a few days and one long session with my therapist to name correctly. It was clarity. A question I had been avoiding answering was suddenly unavoidable. What did I actually want here? Not what was expected of me. Not what would look right to other people. What did I want? I did not want to rush back into a relationship that had cost me years of my sense of self. I also did not want to be the kind of person who let a sick woman die without saying anything at all. I held those two things for a long time. They were both true. They did not cancel each other out. I called my mother. Not my father. My mother. She picked up on the second ring, and there was a long pause before she said my name, and in that pause I heard 5 years of silence sitting between us like furniture that neither of us knew how to move around. We talked for almost an hour. It was not a movie reconciliation. There were no tearful apologies. She did not suddenly understand everything she had done. I did not forgive everything in the space of one conversation. I am not sure I have forgiven everything even now. But we talked, really talked, for the first time I could remember, and somewhere in that conversation she said, in a voice that was quieter than I'd expected, that she knew Daniel had always gotten more from them. She didn't say it as a confession. She said it almost like a fact she was observing from a distance. Something she hadn't quite let herself look at directly until now. She said she didn't know how to explain it. She said she was sorry, and I believe she meant it. And I also know that sorry at the end of something doesn't undo the middle of it. But it was something. I did not move back. I did not become the family caretaker. I set out, as clearly as I could, what I was able to offer, and what I wasn't. I would call once a week. I would visit on major occasions if it felt right to me. I would not pretend that the last 5 years hadn't happened, and I would not perform emotions I didn't have. My mother said okay. She said it quietly. I think she understood she wasn't in a position to negotiate. The first time I visited after that call, I drove to Brampton on a Saturday in April. My father opened the door, and we looked at each other for a moment on the front step, and he did not say anything about the toast at Daniel's wedding. I did not bring it up either. There was no dramatic reckoning. I had stopped needing one. I no longer needed him to understand the damage, because I had already done the work of recovering from it without his participation, and his understanding at this point was not required for me to be okay. That, I realized, was the actual power shift. I didn't need anything from him. Not his approval. Not his apology. Not his acknowledgement. I had built a life that didn't require any of those things, and I showed up at that door as someone who was choosing to be there, not someone who had to be. We had lunch. It was uncomfortable. It was also okay. I'm not going to tell you that everything resolved neatly. It didn't. My relationship with Daniel remains distant. We are polite to each other at family events, and do not call in between. My father and I have not had a real conversation about the past, and may never. My mother and I have found something I'm not sure what to call it, a careful weekly phone call that is more honest than anything we shared before, even if it is limited in other ways. I go to Brampton a few times a year, and I leave when I need to, and I no longer apologize for that. My grandmother came to Ottawa last summer, and I took her to the market on a Saturday morning, and we walked slowly along the stalls, and she bought tomatoes and I carried her bag, and at one point she stopped and looked at me for a moment and said, "You seem settled." She said it like a compliment. I think it was. I am settled. That is the word for it. Not healed completely, not unbothered by everything, not someone who floats above the mess of family history without ever feeling it, but settled. I know who I am. I know what I will accept and what I won't. I know that the voice in my head that used to tell me I was too sensitive, too much, not enough, that voice was not telling the truth. It took me a long time to learn that. I am not going to pretend it didn't. If you grew up being compared, if you were seated at table 11, at an event that should have felt like yours too, if you have spent years trying to earn something from people who decided before you started that you were the lesser one, I am not going to tell you what to do. Every situation is different, and every family is complicated in its own specific ways, and there are no clean answers. But I will tell you what I know, which is this. The moment I stopped needing their approval was the moment I had any real power. Not before. Not when I performed better, or tried harder, or showed up even when it cost me. Only when I finally, genuinely, stopped needing them to tell me I was worth something. That's when things changed. Not for them. For me. That's the part that matters.